3 weeks before the words that split our town down the middle, my boy had what everyone kept calling a simple fever. Out on our place west of Llano, cedar brush, caliche roads, and a windmill that squeaks like a fiddle with a bad string, we'd finished the last of the spring shots on the calves. Luke carried buckets like a man twice his size, hair stuck to his forehead, proud of the dust he wore. That night he said he felt hot in the head, a phrase he got from his granddad, and he sank into the old sofa with a damp shirt and those bright eyes every mother recognizes when a child's body starts to struggle with something it can't quite name. I put the thermometer under his tongue, 102.1. He grimaced like it had betrayed him. "You'll miss school tomorrow," I said, trying to make the sentence sound like a gift. He hated missing math. He loved missing handwriting. I gave him ibuprofen and a sip of ginger ale, set a cool cloth across his forehead, and stirred the beans I'd forgotten on low, because worry is a poor cook. Clay, my husband, stood with one palm on the door jamb, the rancher's stance that means, "I'm standing still so I don't pace." "Call Doc Hale?" he asked. "I will in the morning," I said, like certainty was something you could lay across a couch like a quilt. By morning the fever had nudged higher, and Luke had the ache behind the eyes he never complained about, unless it hurt. "Don't like the light," he whispered, pulling the bill of his cap down, even in the kitchen. He did not want to eat. He did not want to argue. That frightened me more than the number on the display. Clay started the truck, that old Ford that smells like oil, leather, and summer. Half the county could tell it by the sound. We drove into town on Ranch Road 232, mesquites holding out their arms as if to count us. The clinic sits in a limestone building that used to be a feed store. They left the tin letters above the door, H&J Feeds, as if good signage for alfalfa could keep scurvy away too. Juanita, the nurse who has been measuring every child's height for 20 years, gave Luke the look reserved for boys she's seen grow from stitches to sneezes. "Hey, cowboy," she said, and the word "hey" held a whole county of tenderness. She took his vitals, pressed 4 fingers under his jaw, peered in his ears, and made the smallest frown that mothers watch for like weather. Then Doc Amos Hale came in. White hair, sleeves rolled, the kind of doctor towns adopt the way towns adopt stray dogs and make excuses for their limp. He listened to Luke's chest, counted breaths, and smiled the way a man smiles when he wants you to match his calm. "Probably a virus, Ruth," he said to me, and to Luke he spoke the language of the brave. "Your body's fighting. Fever is how it wins. We'll ride this out. Fluids, rest, acetaminophen if he gets achy." He swabbed Luke's throat. No strep. He pressed on Luke's belly. Soft. He checked the back of his neck. No rigidity. He looked in his eyes, and Luke blinked back tears he wouldn't let fall. "Happens every spring," Doc said, the old casual phrase that sometimes comforts and sometimes slides off you like dust. I asked the question every mother asks when told to wait. "What would make you worry?" He counted them off like fence posts. Breathing too fast, confusion, fever that doesn't respond, rash, stiff neck. If anything in your gut says this is off, you bring him back, day or night. We drove home with a handout how to manage fever, clipped to discharge instructions that all looked the same after the first paragraph. Luke slept most of the day. Fever rising, falling, 102, 101, back to 102.5. At 2 in the morning, he stirred and asked if we could open the window so he could hear the windmill. "It sounds like a person talking," he said, his voice like paper. I opened it. The night leaned in with its smell of mesquite smoke from our nearest neighbor 1/2 mile away. He breathed as if he were trying to match his body to the rhythm of something older than us all. Day 2. Fever hung on, lower. He ate toast, then threw up a sip of water. He cried, not from pain but from frustration, which in Luke always meant, "I want to work, not lay still." Day 3. Fever broke in the morning, sweat soaking his hair, temp 99.1 by noon. His grin returned like a sunrise over a fence line. "Can I check the heifers?" he asked. I said no, he said fine, and went to the porch. where he sat like a man planning a trip he wasn't allowed to take. Part of caring for a ranch is learning to read. Cloud bottoms, grass, the language your animals speak when they're thirsty, the language your children speak when they don't want to worry you. Luke refused Tylenol because I'm not a baby. He refused lunch because I ate breakfast big, which he hadn't. He tripped over nothing in the hall and smiled too big to make it not matter. He had bruises on his shins from calves, I told myself. He had weakness from fever, I told myself. He had paler lips than usual that looked like a long day in the sun, not like anemia I didn't know to name. That night, Clay and I sat with mugs of coffee like a shield. He's turned the corner, Clay said, and I wanted to live inside the sentence. He's strong. He said strong like a cattleman says it, a measure of frame, feed, and luck. But a mother knows strength can be a coat over a shiver. I got up to check Luke's chest rise and fall, every hour like a woman in a spell. At 3:10 a.m., I found him sitting up, nosebleed making a dark line down to his lip. I'm okay, he said, pinching his nose like Juanita taught him once when the heater went too long in the winter. The blood stopped in a minute. He lay back. He smiled at me. Something tight behind my ribs whispered, "Remember this." In the morning, the fever was gone. He drank milk and made a face that told me his bones hurt, especially his legs. "Like growing pains times 2, he said, trying to laugh. I rubbed his calves and told him he'd be tall enough to change light bulbs without a chair. I did not say what I should have. I want to go back to Doc today. Part of you always wants to be the mother who is not dramatic, not demanding, not the woman who nurses learn to sigh about when they hang up. Part of you knows you'll be the woman who hates herself later for not being all those things at once. For 2 days, he was quiet, not sick, just not Luke. He colored with his little sister, Marley, drawing Mustangs that looked like the ones we can't afford. He laid his head on Clay's shoulder at supper, something he hadn't done since he was 6. His gums bled when he brushed his teeth, just a little, a crescent moon of pink in the sink. His belly looked a hairful, nothing you would photograph, just a roundness that made his pajama pants fit different. I thought about calling. I didn't. We had fencing to finish on the north line before the neighbors' bulls decided our girls looked friendly. We had a note from the bank that read, like a man tapping his watch. We had the relief that comes after a fever when you want to put the bottle back in the cupboard and call the day good. On day 7, Luke walked to the barn with a feed bucket and sat down halfway there like he'd reached Kansas. I'm just tired, he said, sheepish. He held his side like you do when a stitch catches you. Clay scooped him up without making a show of it. Men know how to carry boys like a promise and set him on a bail. We're going back to the clinic, I said, and this time I did not say it like a question. Doc Hale listened in a different way. He watched Luke pull his sleeve down over a bruise that circled his forearm like a bracelet of fingerprints we hadn't placed there. He pressed on Luke's belly again and paused at the left side, just under the ribs, where something answered him that we could not hear. He peered into Luke's eyes longer, then into mine. "Let's get a CBC," he said softly. "Our lab courier is gone for the day, but we can run a fingerstick here and send out the rest." They pricked Luke's finger. He didn't flinch. He watched the little machine screen like it might show a picture of a horse if he asked politely. Doc excused himself. He returned with a face that wanted to be a field and was instead a fence. He sat on the stool, leaned forward, did that doctor thing where he puts his hands together like a prayer he's afraid the room will overhear. "Ruth, Clay, his white count is very high. His platelets are very low. I want you to go to Dell Children's in Austin now. I'm calling ahead." "I'm riding behind you." "How high?" Clay asked, because numbers feel like something a man can cut. "High enough," he said, and the words meant more than they said. He scribbled, he called, he nodded at things on the wall that had never mattered to me until that minute. I gathered Luke's boots, because you bring boots to the city in case they ask you to walk. I kissed Marley on the hair and asked Anita from next door to keep her till morning. Clay drove. I watched the road breathe under us and counted billboards like prayers. Luke slept, mouth open like little boys do when they forget to be tough. The sun was too bright, the sky was too big. The windmill didn't squeak, it groaned. At the hospital, they moved like a machine that had souls. They stuck needles in places I didn't know had veins. They said words that sat on my tongue like coins. Blasts, leukemia, bone marrow, flow cytometry, all likely. Induction, central line. We start tonight. They asked what time his fever started a week ago, as if the exact minute were a key we'd dropped in the grass. I answered everything like a student in an oral exam. The brand of thermometer, the smell of his breath when he had the nosebleed, whether he'd had a rash, I hadn't seen one, whether anyone at school had strep, yes, whether he'd been around pesticides, always, we live here, whether our house had well water, yes, whether he liked to climb trees, yes, but not lately. A social worker took my elbow and breathed with me like a coach. At midnight, a young doctor with eyes like my sister's asked us to step into the family room. She did not say, "I'm sorry," yet. She said, "We know what it is." She said, "We have a plan." She said, "Many kids do well." She said, "This is a marathon," in a way that did not comfort me because my son was not a runner. He was a ranch kid who never ran from anything. She did not say what I could feel everyone in that floor knew. The next month would teach us a language we had never wanted to learn. And still, while they hung the first clear bag on the IV pole, and Luke looked at it like a man looks at rain after a dry spell, I held in my chest like a wild animal the first thing Doc Hale had said a week ago in that feed store clinic. Probably a virus. It had been true then, as true as a cloud can be without promising rain. It had also been not enough. I made a promise to myself, half vow, half threat, that if anything in me felt off again, I would move heaven, earth, and the county line to get someone to look where I pointed, even if I had to be the woman nurse's side about. I did not know then how soon I would be asked to keep that promise, or how much it would cost us all. The hospital room became our town, room 7B with a view of a parking lot that turned to water when the sun hit it. We learned the schedule of the floor, like ranch hands learn the shrubs, 6 a.m. labs, 7:30 vitals, rounds at 9 with a herd of young in white coats, and one calm cowhand of an attending who translated medicine into something we could hold. Luke's white count peaked, then fell with steroids. His platelets looked like a field after hail. Nothing where something should have stood. He threw up, he slept, he ate jelly from little cups, and called it dinner. Clay wore his hat in every place it was allowed, and held it in his lap in every place it wasn't. He did not take the hat home. He kept it on the chair by the window, a sentinel. He shaved in a hospital bathroom with a razor that chewed him. Men came, donors from the church, neighbors with coolers full of things hospital microwaves shouldn't see, the 4-H leader with cards from Luke's class that smelled like glue. Marley visited on Saturdays, hair bow stuck sideways like a memory. She colored on the whiteboard, drew a cow that looked like an airplane, wrote "I Luke" because she ran out of S. Doc Hale came every afternoon. He never stayed long because it broke him. He stood like a man who wanted to sit and didn't feel he'd earned the chair. He brought oranges once. Juanita had said Luke liked them, and realized too late chemo made citrus taste like pennies. He apologized for the oranges. He apologized for everything. "I should have done a CBC that first day," he said on day 4, not for my benefit, not to ask forgiveness, but because the sentence lived in him like a thorn. Our lab contract lapsed. The courier was late. I told myself to watch and wait. I was wrong. I said nothing, because there are apologies a mother can't touch without dropping them. The team spoke of protocols and MRD, measurable residual disease, as if numbers could be made to behave by stern tone. They told us 2 out of 3 kids with all do very well. They told us our boy's genetics were intermediate risk, which sounded like a school note. He's a B student if he studies. They tapped his spine for a lumbar puncture and put medicine there too, a quiet war on a place no mother wants to picture needles. They taught us to look for fevers because chemo makes your cops leave town, and a common cold becomes a bank robber. I slept in the chair. Clay slept in the other one, until his back made a noise that reminded us we are older than our boy's illness would prefer. The first week passed like a man tries to drink from a hose. The second slowed enough that we could feel our hands again. Luke's fevers stayed gone. He cracked jokes, told bad riddles to nurses, "What do you call a sleepy cowboy, yawn Wayne?" and started a card game tour with other kids on the floor who had stickers where their hair had been. He named his IV pole Hidalgo and asked me to tape a Band-Aid on it so it knows what we're doing to it. He was brave in the way that isn't Instagrammable. He did boring things without complaint. He let men with face shields do undignified things. He said thank you to everyone who stabbed him. On day 13, a nosebleed returned, longer. They transfused platelets. On day 15, he spiked a fever at 101.8. Everyone moved without noise. Blood cultures, broad-spectrum antibiotics, ice chips like diamonds in a paper cup. I walked to the family room and whispered to the vending machine like a sinner at a box, "Don't take my boy." I promised the machine that if the numbers went down, I'd learn to bake for the whole floor, which tells you what stress does to a mind raised on casseroles as currency. The fever bent to the antibiotics by morning. We cheered like we'd branded the last calf. Luke slept a lot, woke with a headache, accepted Tylenol, slept again. The attending frowned, not at the headache, at something behind it, like a dog pricking at a sound you haven't heard yet. He ordered another CBC, another scan, another string of words I lost track of, because the very air tried to pull my feet off the floor. At 2:17 p.m. on day 17, Luke said, "Mom," in a voice that was not a question, but a goodbye. And his face did something faces do when platelets are too low and blood goes where it shouldn't. The room filled with people whose shoes didn't squeak. They said code words that sound like men trying to stop a train. They sent me and Clay into the hall and shut the door like you shut a barn in a storm, knowing what's inside belongs to God and chance now. I held Clay's forearm and felt the tendon under my palm like a rope. The door opened and closed, as if the room couldn't decide if it wanted air. Minutes become lies in a corridor like that. A woman in green touched my shoulder and did not say I'm sorry yet, which I learned is what they teach them. She said we're doing everything. She said it's the bleeding. She said we gave platelets. She said we're trying. I have lived through drought. I have pulled a calf backward while Clay prayed and cussed. I have called a neighbor at 2 a.m. to help when the generator failed and the deep freeze thawed our year's meat. Nothing on God's made earth has ever felt as powerless as standing in a carpeted hallway with a tasteful print of a blue bonnet field on the wall while men and women try to keep blood inside a child. At 2:41, they let us in. The machines had a different tone, somehow both exhausted and urgent. The attending spoke to us while looking at Luke, because some men know respect. "The hemorrhage is severe," he said softly. "We're giving everything we can." He did not say, "It might not be enough." He did not need to. Luke's hand under mine did the smallest bird flutter, and then remembered how to be still. Clay's hat fell to the floor. The next hour folded itself into a shape I still step around so I don't rip my skirt on it. The chaplain came, kind, asked nothing, stood like a fence in the right place. The nurse named Carmen put her cheek to mine when the words came and did not leave a gap, which is how women do in kitchens and in ICU bays. Someone closed the blinds. Someone turned the sound down on a monitor, as if not to wake my boy when we kissed his forehead the way we'd kissed it at 102.1. I could tell you details to prove the world kept turning. The parking ticket timestamp, the coffee that tasted like pennies, the sticky place on the floor by the elevator where someone spilled a soda the day before and no one had mopped. But all I remember is a silence that isn't empty. It's a silence full of everything you will never get to say. They gave us a room where people put their loud grief so they don't crack the hallway. I thought about Luke's boots in the truck. I thought about the way he'd left his cap on the back of the chair sideways that morning, as if it would laugh when it saw him again. I thought about Doc Hale saying virus, And I thought, this is not his fault, and this is not his fault, and both thoughts were true, and could not live in the same body, unless the body grew a new bone to hold them. We went home the next day with a black bag the hospital gives families now, soft edges and a folder in it with bereavement resources that I could not read because the word bereavement looks too polite for death. The windmill squeaked again because it's a rude thing. Grief, how it puts back ordinary noises as if to dare you to hear them differently. Marley asked if Luke was in heaven. I said I hope so, because hope was the only verb that fit in my mouth. The town set casseroles on our porches like a slow flood. The church filled with people who knew that sometimes you sit shoulder to shoulder, not because you understand anything, but because knees pressed to wood benches make a sound God recognizes. On day 23, after the funeral, after the dirt that sounds like rain when it hits a box, after I stood by the fence and told the calves to behave as if they were men, Doc Hale asked to speak at the stock show barn on Friday night. He said he had something to say. Clay looked at me. I looked at his hat. We both nodded. We did not know what he would say. We did not know our town would hear itself break and also hear the first draft of how it might hold. The Llano County Stock Show barn smells like alfalfa, dust, diesel, and years. The boards know the size of a steer by the way a boot scuffs them. The lights buzz a little like locusts at dusk. We gathered on metal bleachers, denim and Sunday shirts, hats lined along knees like boats tied bow to stern. Kids ran until their mothers hooked them with a name said in full. Men stood with arms crossed, not because they were angry, but because that's how men hold themselves when a room is about to be asked to do something heavy. Doc Amos Hale stood near the auctioneer's box without a mic. He didn't need one. Quiet makes its own sound when it's the right kind. He wore his oldest jacket, the one with pen marks on the inside pocket from 1,000 rushed signatures. Juanita stood behind him with a hand on his elbow, like a woman ready to catch a man who doesn't know he's going to fall. He began without preface, the way cattlemen tell a story when they've been caught by it. "I owe you truth," he said. "It will not bring back Luke, but it may change who we are next time a child in this town has a fever." He looked at us, not over our heads, not at the floor. He found me and Clay and did not flinch. He swallowed in the way you can hear in a barn, and then he laid his tools on the table the way a man lays down his pockets to be searched. "I said virus," he continued. "I said watch and wait. I meant no harm. I meant what I've meant 1,000 times when a child in May runs hot and then fine. But I was wrong, not just in the outcome, in the system I let us accept. We didn't run the CBC that first day because our contract with the lab had lapsed and the courier wouldn't come till morning. And I told myself I wasn't sending a family 30 miles and 3 hours and $100 for a test that would probably be fine. I told myself the odds. I told myself this boy was strong and ranch kids shake off a lot. I told myself what keeps a small clinic alive when the budget is thin and the days are long. I trusted my pattern. My pattern killed us. Deed, some words are so heavy, a room shifts under them like a truck easing onto a cattle guard. Men looked at boots, women pressed lips thin to keep the sound inside. Somewhere high up, a swallow complained, because even grief has housekeeping to do. "I am not here to tell you medicine guarantees anything," he said. "Leukemia is a beast that has taken children who got every test on time. I am not here to ask you to forgive me, though God knows I want it. I'm here to confess and to change what can be changed. I sold my boat," he said, voice steadying on the economics of penance. "I took out what I could from my retirement. With Juanita and the clinic board, I've bought a point-of-care analyzer that runs a CBC in 5 minutes on a fingerstick. It will sit in that old feed store building starting Monday. I have signed a contract I should have signed years ago to have on-call consults with Dell Children's, a real pediatric hematologist on video in our exam room when we need one. And I am changing the protocol at our clinic. Any child with fever more than 48 hours, any easy bruising, any nosebleed out of proportion, gum bleeding, fatigue that makes a ranch kid sit down in the field, we test. No watch and wait where waiting costs nothing but my comfort. And I'm telling you something I haven't told anyone. I will probably lose patience over this. I may lose you. But I cannot keep carrying your trust like it is something I inherited. It's something I must earn again, one stick of blood at a time. He took a breath that made his jacket rise like a loaf. He looked at me. "Ruth," he said, and my name broke in the air like a dropped plate. "I am a man who has delivered a dozen of your calves, who has taken stitches out of Clay's hand, who has signed your children's school physicals on the tailgate to get them to the bus on time. I decided to save you trouble. In doing so, I cost you everything. I will carry that. I am sorry." There it was. The two-syllable door. A room like ours rarely opens, because once it does, the wind has a way in. People cried. Not pretty tears, barn tears that leave salt on a man's shirt and drop into sawdust to be carried out by boots. One of the 4-H moms put her hand flat on the bleacher between her knees the way women do when they need the earth to agree to hold them. Clay stood. He held his hat in both hands, brim up like a bowl. He did not look at me because he knew if he did, he'd weep. He looked at Doc. "I was raised to believe strength is fixing what you break and keeping quiet about what you can't," he said, voice low and clean. "I can't fix my boy being gone. I can't keep quiet either. Amos, Doc, I can't put a price on sorry, but I can decide what we do with it. You looked at us and told us the truth. That's the beginning of trust, not the end. You change your clinic. We'll change our habits. We will not be the people who say, 'Oh, he's tough,' when a child can't make it to the barn. We will not be the people who'd rather save a trip than ask a hard thing. We will not be the people who call women dramatic because they insist. We will insist with them. And when a ranch kid gets a fever, we will treat it like a fence cut. Go look, even if it's probably a calf rubbing wrong." He sat. A sound went through the room like cattle shifting as a group at night. Soft, inevitable. Pastor Lane stood and didn't preach. He told a story about his own son's asthma the year their insurance got mean. Juanita told us the analyzer had a screen like a Game Boy, and that the first child it would test would get a sticker that said, "I helped build this." The school nurse offered to keep a log of kids with fevers for longer than 2 days and call the clinic herself. Mrs. Ruiz from the diner said she'd keep soup in the freezer, labeled for families sent to Austin at midnight. Old man Tyndall, who never speaks unless it's about bulls, stood and said he'd buy gas cards for anyone headed to the city. People pledged hours, money, pies, rides. We did what small towns do when confronted with a thing too big to lift. We disassembled it into pieces we could carry. Doc raised a hand once more. "There is one more thing," he said. And now his voice did that shaking you see in a man who has not eaten all day. 2 nights before Luke left us, he asked me if Hidalgo, that was his IV pole, ever got tired. I told him I thought maybe it did. He said we should make the clinic poles look like horses too, so kids wouldn't be scared of them, and so nurses would have to name them, and grown-ups would have to laugh once a day. I told him I'd see what I could do. I'm here to tell you we're doing it. Monday morning, there will be 4 IV poles painted by Marley's class and Luke's friends with manes and names, and there will be a plaque above them that says, "If you're pulling, I'm with you. Luke." That's not medicine. That's human. And if you ask me, after 40 years in this town, medicine without that is a dry creek. A sob broke out in the bleachers and turned into a laugh before it finished. Some sounds learn 2 languages at once. Marley hit my hip with her small shoulder, the way she does when she wants to be picked up, and also to stand on her own. I put my palm on her hair. Clay reached for my other hand, and we made a bridge between us that felt like a thing our boy could walk across if heaven has places like barns. After the meeting, no one stampeded. People moved like they do after rain, slower, heavier, careful of new mud. They came to us in a line we did not organize, each with a word, a gesture, a story about Luke, and something he said with his mouth full, or a time he closed a gate without being told. Doc stood 10 feet away, not inviting what he wanted, not dodging what he deserved. Men clapped his shoulder the way men say we're not done. Women held him the way women say we're not done either. 2 weeks later, the CBC machine hummed in the clinic, a soft, industrious sound like bees. We brought Hidalgo from the hospital. Carmen had made sure he came home, and 3 8th graders and Marley painted poles in the yard behind the feed store clinic, while Juanita kept cups of water full and the gospel station low. They painted 1 Palomino, 1 Paint, 1 Roan, and 1 that looked like a donkey because some kids don't want a horse every time, and Luke would have liked that. They wrote the names with permanent marker: Dusty, Molly, Bandit, Stubborn. The first week it sat there, that little machine changed 2 children's stories in ways only their families will ever fully understand. A 7-year-old with just the sniffles had platelets low enough to need a run to the city that afternoon. A ranch hand's daughter with fevers and a rash got sent out for something else entirely and came back okay the next day with cheeks flushed and a sticker that said, "I helped." Our town started catching breath in places we used to lose it. And grief, which does not obey clocks, settled into the house like a new animal, one you feed and don't try to train. Some mornings I miss Luke so hard the sky goes blurry and the fence posts look like men holding their hats. Some nights I hear the windmill squeak and think it speaks his name. We keep his boots by the door. We keep his drawing of a Mustang on the fridge, dank with magnets. We say hi when we pass the stock show barn like people tip their hats at a grave. And I do a thing I never did before. When a mother in the grocery line with the HEB labels, the size of billboards, says, "He's had a fever," in that voice that holds 1,000 apologies, I do not tell her to calm down. I tell her to go. I tell her they'll test him. I tell her how to ask for Juanita first, and Doc if needed, and the analyzer on the counter that looks like a microwave that learned to listen. I used to think strength was not crying. Now I think strength is crying and calling anyway. I used to think forgiveness was what you gave a man to make a story end. Now I think forgiveness is what you give a town so a story can keep going the way it should have in the first place. When the sun falls behind the live oaks and the heifers low like foghorns and the wind forgets to be mean, I sit on the back step and hear the county murmuring. Diesel far off, a coyote practicing, our windmill talking in its old grammar. I say Luke's name out loud into it because names are like gates. You keep them swinging or they rust. In the clinic, Dusty and Molly and Bandit and Stubborn stand by the wall where kids can see them when they're scared. Above them, the plaque says what my boy said, and it is both a blessing and a job description. If you're pulling, I'm with you. And if you ask what Doc said that broke everyone's heart, I could say it was, "I was wrong." I could say it was, "I am sorry." Both are true. But what broke us and then began to stitch us was what he said after, "We will do it differently now." In this part of Texas, promises are supposed to be like fence posts, set deep, straight, and meant. We dug a hole that night big enough for such a promise. And every time that little machine hums, every time a nurse puts a sticker on a kid who might have been missed, every time a mother is told you were right to come, I hear the barn again, the quiet, the swallow, the hat falling, and a town strong enough to measure itself not by how hard its men's hands are, but by how quickly those hands open a door when a child knocks.